Here's a guy who thinks that music is evidence of God.
Okay, so in this video, I want to give an argument for God's existence from music. I was very skeptical that a good argument like this could be made.
No, you weren't. You just say that every time you're about to make a very silly argument.
But I'm doing research for a book that comes out in fall of 2021. I'm going to share more details about that in February. So if it's February or 2021 or after that you're watching this, I'll have put that in the video description if you're interested. But anyway, I'm doing research and I'm just very much impressed that a good argument actually can be made. I like to make it as an abductive argument, which simply means an inference to the best explanation. So this is not yielding a certain conclusion like a deductive argument would. And I give this as not a comprehensive argument. I give this as just looking at two alternatives, a theistic worldview and a naturalistic worldview. And I basically want to make the argument that theism gives you a better explanatory framework for the experience of music.
An explanation has to be testable to be a good explanation. There's no way to test for the existence of God.
And first, I just want to say people experience transcendence through music.
What does that mean, and what would it have to do with God?
So basically, the argument starts like this, by just a simple observation. Human beings experience transcendence in the context of listening to music. And most of us can relate to that at a personal level, whether it's classical music or being at a U2 concert or something like that. Most of us have had moments where we've felt not only pleasure because of music, but a sense of transcendence.
What's the difference? I still have no idea what transcendence means in this context.
And Charles Taylor spends a lot of time talking about how in a secular context, the arts play a different role than they have in pre-modern cultures, because all throughout human history, music has been embedded in some kind of metaphysical context in which that association with transcendence makes sense. So he talks about listening to Mozart's Requiem, for example, and how there's religious themes in this piece of art. So this applies to music, but also all the arts. And he's basically saying there's a kind of loss and impoverishment in a secular context for many people listening to this song.
It would sound the same to me in either context, but I'm sure that for people who enjoy going to church, listening to that song would feel different in different contexts. Every song is going to have different effects on people when listened to in different contexts. What feelings a song evokes depends on the context in which you listen to it the most. Listening to Auld Lang Syne in July doesn't feel the same as hearing it at New Year's.
I think the challenge he puts is something like this. Here's the challenge for the unbeliever: to find a non-theistic register in which to respond to the arts without impoverishment.
That's entirely subjective. I don't at all feel as though my lack of theism impoverishes my experience of music.
One example of this would be Julian Barnes. He's an agnostic. In his memoir, he has a lot to say about missing God. And he talks about the sense of nostalgia for God. And the context in which he talks about that the most is the arts. So he talks about music. He talks about even sculptures and paintings that have a religious connotation to them, and the sense of loss and nostalgia in enjoying those pieces of art. And his explanation for that is religion gave life a sense of context and therefore seriousness. Was it true? No. Then why miss it? Because it was a supreme fiction, and it is normal to feel bereft on closing a great novel.
That sounds like a pretty good explanation to me. I don't know why you cite it as though it helps your argument.
For some people, music points to God himself. Albert Einstein famously said, although probably speaking in a metaphorical sense of God, nonetheless, it's interesting that he would think to say this. He's listening to a violin prodigy play. Afterwards, he says, "Now I know that there is a God in heaven." Or there's a story in Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs, where Yo-Yo Ma is at Jobs' house playing his beautiful cello. And afterwards, Jobs says, "You playing is the best argument I've ever heard for the existence of God."
That's not very convincing to me. I don't really see why God is necessary for someone to be good at playing the cello. Even if what impresses you is the emotions it evokes, I don't see how that requires the supernatural. I don't even understand how it could involve the supernatural.
And I've actually observed in debates, I watch a lot of debates between theists and atheists or agnostics, and it's interesting the way sometimes the aesthetic argument, which would be the family of arguments of which the argument for God from music is one example, sometimes merit more respect than the more strictly logical arguments from the skeptic.
Not from me. Arguments that are effectively feels over reals seem to me to be the least deserving of respect. The only sense in which I might find such arguments more respectable is that they drop the pretense that theism is grounded in reason.
Now, people might say, okay, so what? People think of God during music, big deal. But it just raises the question at this point. It's just a question. What is the best explanation for this sense of transcendence?
What is that? What does that even mean? If you're talking about a feeling, the only coherent explanation is that it's something the brain does. It's a physiological process. What else could it possibly be? I don't understand what it would even mean to say that God is giving you those feelings. If these feelings are not brain activity, what are they? I presume you think there's some kind of function of the soul, but why would a soul be better equipped to produce these emotions than a brain? Given that a soul isn't made out of anything, I don't understand what it would mean for a soul to do anything, or even exist. For the same reason I don't understand what it means to say that God exists. I don't know how God could be the best explanation for anything if he's not even a discernibly coherent explanation.
So the question that we're asking in this video is, what's the best way to understand this kind of transcendent power that music has?
You still haven't explained what that even means.
On a naturalistic worldview, you're basically looking at evolutionary psychology. This is the explanation for everything about us, and it's a reductive explanation, meaning, on a theistic account, evolution can play a role. Some theists believe in greater, other lesser amounts of evolution in terms of the explanatory extent of those mechanisms, but on a naturalistic worldview, it's all evolution, all the way down. So what that means is basically you're looking at these different theories that all amount to what Stephen Jay Gould called an evolutionary spandrel, which simply means a byproduct or unintentional consequence of the process.
That sounds like a pretty reasonable explanation to me. I suspect that music is a consequence of our brains being hardwired to be sensitive to prosody.
So on a view like this, two things follow. Number one, music is arbitrary. We could have evolved such that we wouldn't find music beautiful. It would just be white noise to us.
Yeah, that seems entirely reasonable to me. Why are you citing this implication with an incredulous tone like it's absurd?
Secondly, music is illusory. It's deceiving us in some way. We find it beautiful. We experience transcendence through some kind of accident as it's triggering things that evolved for some other reason.
It's only illusory if you confuse emotional reactions with perceptions. When you experience beauty, you're not perceiving an attribute of the thing that is beautiful. You're experiencing your own reaction to the thing. That's what it means to say that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, although it's more specifically in the brain of the beholder. That's why it's so much easier to get people to agree that the Mona Lisa is 77 centimeters by 53 centimeters than it is to get people to agree that it's beautiful. One is a perception, the other is a reaction.
Because they had survival value. Now, most of us, when we consider that, especially in the context of actually experiencing music, feel a sense of loss.
I don't. I feel the opposite. Knowing how the experience works actually enhances my enjoyment of it. I have the same reaction to beautiful things as Richard Feynman did. He said that scientific knowledge about something only adds to its beauty. It doesn't subtract from it at all.
So now consider the other alternative. On a theistic view, music is not a deception or an illusion. Music is a little clue into what ultimate reality is really like. Music, along with every other form of beauty in this world, is a faint reflection of what exists beyond space and time.
To exist means to have location within space and time. Existing beyond space and time is a nonsensical contradiction.
So think about the contrast between these two. On one worldview, music is an accident. On the other, it's a language.
Language is also an accident. Nobody consciously decided to invent language.
On a theistic worldview, music is like a window to an imprisoned person. It's a little clue of what might be out there. And so I like to say, think of someone stuffed in a dark dungeon, and there's a little window, and light is streaming through. What if the nostalgic longing, the feeling of transcendence that is associated with music is like that window? It's not a distraction. It's not an accident. It's a little clue of what is ultimately out there. I find that more plausible, and I find it so much more beautiful and compelling.
I find it nonsensical and therefore less beautiful and compelling. But even if it were the case that music shows some reality that exists outside of time and space, whatever that's supposed to mean, how is that evidence that a God exists? To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.